And so we tend to think about ourselves as the center of the world when it comes to tech, but there's clearly a lot of important robotics going on here. I think we need, so my wish list is that we can have broader access to education in robotics. I think robotics as a teaching tool is immensely powerful. It teaches you, it's an opportunity to learn about all manner of engineering topics and programming topics, as well as robotics itself. And that's getting better. That's a lot better than it was when I was a kid. I mean, we've now had, we've had a number of interns work for us who are high school students, and they're just excellent. And they already know more about Python and C++ programming and robotics at 16 years old than I did when I was, at least until I was like 25. So that's definitely going in the right direction. But we also need, we need access to lower cost robots. And that's still, I think, a big challenge, is that for education and research purposes, you tend to have the very small, kind of very limited capability Lego type robots. And then you have, we work with other robot companies to make a platform we call the TurtleBot. It's an open source robot platform for education and research. And it's sort of this size, but it's still, approaching $1,000. And that's quite a lot. And there's not a lot in between. And that, I think if we could get to a capable robot that had a decent payload size, that could run around in classrooms and could be really programmable and have good sensors in the $100 range, I think that would really change the experience for a lot of people.
Like the Commodore 64 of robots.
There you go.
And by we, I presume you mean in the United States, because some of the countries have even not adopted digitalization.
Sure. Yeah, I'm thinking largely about the already largely developed world. This was my first time to Odense, and Esmond was kind enough to pick me up, and he's very proud of his Tesla, and he showed me repeatedly the high acceleration that it can get as we were jumping between all the various robot companies. And I have to say, it's very impressive, the robotics ecosystem that has sprung up here in Odense. I live in Silicon Valley and have done for 20 years. And so we tend to think about ourselves as the center of the world when it comes to tech, but there's clearly a lot of important robotics going on here, and that's an impressive thing to see. And it seems like somehow much more practical than the robotics and certainly than robotics that we generally see in Silicon Valley. That tends to be much more very far-reaching, very aspirational. Everything is an exponential change kind of projects. Whereas I feel like what I've seen happening here is much more. I mean, I don't want to call it incremental because that sounds pejorative, but it's just much more. I can imagine the impact coming much earlier in time.
Pragmatic or practical.
Yeah.
And also it has to do with the investment climate. I mean, it's here the money are a little bit smaller and compared to Silicon Valley at least, and you have to quickly get to some kind of revenue and some kind of earnings ideally, and maybe not as far-reaching as some of the Silicon Valley-based robotics companies. But there's a lot of them here, actually, a lot of technologies. And, I mean, we have around 140 robot companies, as you mentioned. Is that what you wanted to?
Yeah, I think historically there wasn't a push for earnings or even revenue from Silicon Valley companies, right? It's always about growth. You just want more users for whatever it is that you're building. But the economic climate's changing, and the investment is getting harder to come by, and that there's more pressure now. I have friends who are running companies, and now to go get that next round of funding, they actually have to show real traction with customers, and that's a challenge. That's not something that a lot of these companies had really focused on. They'd focused almost completely on developing technology and not so much on connecting with customers. So they're getting a little more, they're being forced to get a little more grounded now.
And the valuations are crazy. Everything is a moonshot, and yeah, that's what we experience. The pitches from.
Yeah, when we see pitches from California, it's different kinds of money.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah.
And what would you say Silicon Valley is better than UNCE? Some of the unique strengths that exist in this ecosystem there.
Oh, the weather is really good.
Tell us something we don't know.
Oh, okay. I get to go surfing all the time, so that's nice. So I think that the concentration of venture capital there, I think, is why. That's the main reason. Is it's two things. It's the combination of venture capital and the talent. So you've got just a huge supply of money and a huge supply of talented people all floating around in the same area. And so if you're looking for investment, all the major firms are there. And then when you need to hire people, just among the big tech companies, you've got a few 100,000 people who are highly trained engineers who you can draw from, and you don't need to relocate them. And they all, people go through natural cycles in their careers. So they might go work for a big tech company for a few years and, get themselves to be financially comfortable. And then they're ready to come back out and take a chance on a startup company. And that happens all the time. Right. So that's the ecosystem just naturally lends itself to forming new companies there.
But then there's something about, because Silicon Valley has so much, has a lot of focus on IT, and us arguably by far the world's leading IT center, but robotics is slightly different. So how is that transition going for them? I know you're in robotics, but you are in software for robotics.
That's right. Also, I've never had to go pitch for investment because we've always made a living off of actually working with customers and having revenue. But I can tell you from kind of secondhand experience that the investors still prefer pure software plays. Everybody wants an infinitely scalable, zero cost copy kind of deal. And there are lots of investment firms out there that will not go into robotics because it involves actually making stuff.
And the time constants are a little bit longer. So we often say the robotics is somewhere between medical companies that have a 10-year time constant and software companies that are more like half a year. And then robotics is somewhere in between that. So it takes a different kind of investors or a different kind of mentality from the investors to understand that. It's not something you pour in money and then 6 months later you get some traction. I mean, that's not how robotics work.
Right.
So that might be a change for the Silicon Valley investor climate.
I think there's also, some of the investors are feeling a little bit hesitant after a lot of money has been invested in things like self-driving cars, right? You look at the scale of investment over the scale of time that money has been put into self-driving cars, and we still, as far as I know, don't have self-driving cars. Whatever Elon Musk says to the contrary, we don't actually have self-driving cars. And so there are some classes of problems that are kind of like, there are problems that are basically robotic in nature that a lot of resources have been put into, and we still haven't cracked it. And so I think that makes some investors a little bit more gun shy about going after the really challenging problems.
Yes, and that's back to that. Everything has to be a moonshot and like revolutionized and exponential, and instead of making something that actually makes a difference for somebody in 2 years. So maybe a much smaller market, but more practical.